Hey there, I'm Beletsky. Before we begin, remember that these first impressions reviews are made in the context of Gaining Grounds 1 with everything we know about that meta, so some options' usefulness may change with the introduction of Gaining Grounds 2. If you aren't familiar with my rating system, you should first watch the explanation linked in the video description. Anything stated in my videos is ultimately my own opinion. If you disagree with anything I say, write it in a comment below. I'll be compiling and responding to questions and feedback in a video later on. Also, my channel is small and won't be releasing videos daily, so you're unlikely to see them unless you hit those YouTube buttons you always hear about. It costs nothing, lets you know when my content comes out, and gives me that sweet dopamine hit that tells me to keep making videos. So please subscribe, like the video, and write something to me below. It really means a lot. With that being said, let's get into the first keyword review with EVS. Playstyle Prediction. EVS is an aggressive crew which heavily uses card advantage to win duels and pressure opponents' hands. They're less restricted than a bubble crew, but not as free as a skirmish crew, as they want to stay within 8 inches of Maxine to keep their card draw engine alive. They also commit to the melee early and pressure the opponent's crew into awkward positioning, preventing them from moving around the board freely and scoring victory points. However, EVS needs to tailor their list to the threats they expect to see from the opponent. This could be the difference between hurting the opponent into a poor position or throwing half your crew into a massacre. With good play, they try to prevent the enemy from scoring early and secure a sizable victory point lead by the time casualties are numerous on both sides. Keyword features. Deep Discovery. Deep Discovery lets any EVS model discard a card to cheat with the top of the opponent's discard pile once per activation. This occasionally gives you great value out of the weak cards you draw, but requires some intricate understanding of flip timing. When you choose a card for a duel with a plus flip, you place the card in what's called the conflict and discard the rest in any order before cheating. So if there's a 13 on top of the deck and EVS attacks, the target can prevent EVS from using the 13 by covering it up with a positive flip from focus or another source. The other interesting interaction is that the conflict cards from a duel are discarded before the damage flip, so whatever card the opposing model used in the duel is available for deep discovery if the damage is cheatable. This combined with steep damage tracks makes focus incredibly important for EVS to ensure straight damage flips. If an opponent uses a severe card for defense, EVS can deep discovery that severe card for high damage while having only used a weak card from their hand. Overall, just keep an eye on the opposing discard pile, and when it helps, it helps. It also requires your opponent's attention to prevent you from using this, so even if they're super careful about it, it's likely to take a mental toll on them and help them slip up somewhere else. Reconfigure. Reconfigure lets the model use any cheated card of the stated suit as a 9. This is very powerful, although that isn't immediately obvious. To help visualize the ability in a more familiar way, I like to think of this as, when cheating, discard a card of the suit to have a 9 of the suit be your card. A 9 is a moderate equal to or better than roughly 2/3 of the deck, so for common attacks with a +1 advantage like Stat 6 versus Defense 5, your opponent requires a severe to win the duel, even if you cheated a 2. For defending, a model at the same common -1 stat disadvantage can't lose the duel by more than 5, except to the red joker. This works with Deep Discovery, so if the top card of your opponent's discard pile is a weak that matches your reconfigure suit, you can discard a card of any suit to cheat a 9. Just remember it only works on cheated cards, and it won't stop your opponent's best cards when they're dedicated to forcing through an attack. As we'll see later, it's going to be important to have a mixture of reconfigure suits in your crew. The reconfigure suits are Crow for Kiya, Harata, and Machinist, Mask for Tidecaller, Harpooner, and Orville, and Totem for Beebe and Calypso when Beebe is the pilot. Maxine can use any suit, swapping which in the start phase. There's no model who naturally reconfigures Rams, making them a good choice for Maxine. The combination of Deep Discovery and Reconfigure means that any card drawn by EVS is useful, no matter how low the value is. And using a stone to draw and discard at the start of the turn shouldn't be necessary, so you can spend a few more on crew hiring or save them for prevention. Master and Totem. Maxine Agassiz, 15 cost Master. Maxine is the central engine of EVS due to Captain of the Superior. You really can't overstate how strong this is. It has a massive 8-inch range, it lets you liberally cheat cards without worrying about saving cards, and it'll almost guarantee draw 6 or more cards on an average turn. That's like drawing at least a whole new hand after using the first one. This ability is the reason a mix of reconfigure suits is so important. You'll want it so that any card that lands in your hand can be used and cycled. Otherwise, having all your models with reconfigured crows, but a handful of rams and masks would leave you stuck and unable to cycle for the rest of the turn unless you draw a card another way. I call this clogging the engine. Keep this in mind when I rate some of the models later on, since having a unique reconfigure suit can remove clogs in the engine and result in drawing and cheating a lot of extra cards by the end of the turn. As the EVS Master, Maxine has reconfigure herself, but on a variable X suit which she chooses during the start phase. You should choose this suit based on your hand, enemy offensive triggers, how in danger Maxine is, and which suit you want Maxine to have easy access to when she activates. Without additional information though, I would say in the average case it's best to choose rams. No other EVS model has rams, and the One for All trigger, which we'll be seeing later, is extremely powerful. In addition to reconfigure, 2 Steps Ahead treats any enemy cards of the X suit as having a value of 1 for opposed duels with Maxine. This auto-wins her duels if the opponent can't cheat with a different suit, and effectively shuts off many triggers and cheating opportunities for enemy models against her. It also lets her get straight damage flips very easily, which leads to an offensive combo I'll be going over in a minute. First, her survival and attacks. Maxine is so important to her crew, but quite fragile for a master. 11 health, 5-6 stats, and no common or uncommon damage reduction abilities means that she'll be relying on protector models, positioning safely, and winning duels. Being immune to stun is great, but it won't keep her alive by itself. Her melee and gun attacks share the same mediocre damage track and serve different purposes due to the effects and triggers. Strike Between the Lines is for avoiding concealment and friendly fire, attacking willpower, and further thinning your opponent's deck of non-X cards before using Order and Chaos. The discard trigger is just a nice bonus. Clockwork Revolver, on the other hand, is for staying safely out of danger, and the triggers. Between the actual flipped card values and anything usable by reconfigure, there's rarely a bad option to choose with Age of Inspiration, and 12-inch range draw out secrets in a crew which will almost always have the suits they want is fantastic for dropping scheme markers. Remember that you can use this on friendly models. Maxine will be using Impromptu Invention often. It ignores concealment, which is phenomenal. You choose any condition, and once per activation, give it to a model. It triggers to increase the condition value to +2 or copy the same condition to another model within 2 inches of the first one. This opens up a plethora of possibilities and is extremely flexible. For friendly models, Impromptu goes off on a 5 and will usually give fast to 2 models or focus +2. Note that the ram trigger can be used on Maxine herself, but not if she's gained a condition this activation, such as shielded from the emissary. Against enemy models, the best invention is giving 2 models stunned. Other great options are Slow, Adversary EVS, Adversary Construct, Adversary Living, or Injured +2. Sometimes it can be right to use Distracted +2 for defense, Staggered to prevent scheming, or Burning in Poison to finish off a model. Keep in mind the value Maxine is trading for when using this action. Master AP is expensive, so giving only one model Focused 1 or Fast, which are both effectively 1 AP, isn't a great trade, although sometimes game circumstances will definitely prove otherwise. She wants to use a trigger to maximize the effectiveness most of the time. Now, her bonus action and offensive combo. Order and Chaos is best used towards the end of turns. When your opponent's fate deck is almost at its end and they're running lower on cards to cheat, Maxine can shuffle any X-suit cards back into the enemy deck. You can also do this to your own deck, but Reconfigure only works when cheating, while 2 Steps Ahead works on all enemy flips. And since the X trigger makes this into a leap by shuffling 2 weaks into the deck, it's better to avoid putting weak cards back in your deck anyway. If your opponent's deck is at 6 or less cards, using Order and Chaos to shuffle at least 9 X cards into it makes for a 2 out of 3 chance to flip those cards at minimum. Now until the opponent reshuffles the deck, enemies are stuck flipping 1s against Maxine on offense or defense. So she bonus actions and triggers to place within 6 for perfect positioning, draws a card from Captain of the Superior, and then has 3 AP to attack. With equal stats, this lets Maxine get straight damage flips on a 6 or positive damage flips on an 11. Against Defense or Willpower 4 though, Maxine gets positive damage flips just by using her Reconfigure suit. All in all, Maxine is a very impactful master as long as you manage to protect her. Orville Agassiz, 4-cost Enforcer Totem. Orville is a cheap schemer, which sounds good for a beater crew that may need something a little faster to score points, but he's nowhere as impactful as the better totems in the game unless he's combined with Harata to turn into more of a defensive support model with Sputtering Exhaust. His defense 6 and concealment are good at defending against throwaway attacks, but his willpower is low and a single focus hit dealing moderate or severe 4 damage will one-shot him in almost every game as soon as line of sight allows for it. The exception to this is when benefiting from the Neri Haka or Intrepid Emissaries take the hit while staying in range thanks to Tidecaller, but we'll go over that combo later. Up We Go at stat 2 isn't great offensively, but may be impactful if you can manage to place an enemy into or behind terrain. It can also be used to move your own models at the cost of 1 or 2 damage. And finally, he's move 6 with Flight, and his bonus action lets him ignore enemy engagement, which is fine if he needs to use that and manages to survive, but for the most part, he doesn't have a bonus action, which really sucks. Overall, Orville's impactfulness just depends on what other models you take in the crew, so it's really a toss-up. Keyword choices. Kiya Manini, 10 cost henchman. Kiya is fairly straightforward. She has passable bulk, and as a construct she can be healed in Keyword by Beebe. 5 move and no movement abilities is slow though, but remedied by Tidecaller's toss. Ruthless is great to have around, her reconfigure is Crows, and Technophile comes in handy when you really need the reconfigured card for your next attack, or are afraid of clogging the engine if you draw a bad suit. Most of the time, I'd prefer to keep drawing cards from the deck though. She's going to usually want to activate early and use Shield Generator with a Crow for the trigger, which gives her shielded for her melee attack and lets her push enemies when they damage her in melee. Her 2-inch engagement range lets her push enemies so that they're engaged but not engaging her, and we all know how annoying it is to be at the receiving end of that, so imagine how annoying it must be that it happens every single time you attack her. Even models with 2-inch engagement ranges can't melee her twice unless they can charge multiple times, move without spending AP, or they have already started the activation engaging her. Kiya deals 2-4-6 in melee, which is made irreducible if she drops 1 shielded. With 2 AP she can do this for both attacks using her bonus and 1 shielded from the Intrepid Emissary. She has to pay the cost before flipping the duel, which sucks if she misses, but her track is effectively 3-5-7 against 1 reduction, or 4-6-8 against 2 reduction. Both triggers are decent too, but nothing crazy. Just be careful fielding her against too many hard-to-wound models, as flipping weak 2 hurts for 10 cost. Discus Grenade with a Tome and 2 close enemies does minimum 1 to the target and 2 to the non-target in increments of 1, bypassing armor and hard to kill. With all the tiny pushes EVS has, or by alpha striking quickly on turn 1 against a bubbled opponent, it's not unreasonable to find even 3 or more enemies bunched up. So if Kiya uses a focus and gets straight flips, she could deal up to 6 to 10 damage in the right circumstances. Final verdict, in Keyword, 4 stars. Against crews which are primarily melee and don't have hard to wound, Kiya's kit makes her extremely hard to take down and dangerous. She's hurt more easily with ranged attacks, so Harata is going to be a better choice in that case, as we'll see later. Out of Keyword, 2 stars. Kiya could be a solid but expensive tech choice against heavily melee or armor 2 spam crews, but she will need help getting around efficiently and generating the additional shielded for her 2 melee attacks. Harata Nataro, 9 cost Enforcer. Harata is very interesting, with a lot of abilities on his card. His reconfigure is on Crows, which competes with Kiya, so usually try taking one or the other, but not both. Firstly and most importantly is Harata's Haka. This gives allied EVS models within 4 inches one of 3 abilities. Nieri is the most important. It cancels all positive flips on opposed duels and damage flips, cancelling things like focused or unionized. This is critical since the FAQ on Luck Thief implies the positives are ignored before cancelling positives and negatives, meaning if your opponent suffers a negative flip of any kind, he has no way of getting a straight flip. This combines with Concealment or Distracted to make your EVS models virtually unhittable, and is EVS's best defense against getting ripped apart at range. Peru Peru is really fun to say, and is like a reverse Intrepid Aura, making enemies who fail opposed duels by 3 or more suffer 1 damage with no limits to how often or range. This will happen naturally roughly 30% of the time, but when combined with Reconfigure or Maxine's 2 steps ahead, it can pile on a significant amount of damage or help remove hard to kill enemies at 2 health. Note that the enemy doesn't need to be in range of the aura, only the EVS model does. Tutu, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that next part, is the least useful one since Harata has to give up using the other 2, but it can come in handy. It lets an EVS model drop 2 ski markers in a single activation, it can help with moving friendly models, or it can move enemy models with no duel to resist. It's a shame that EVS models don't have more abilities to drop ski markers at range or while in combat though. Remember that for all 3 Haka, Harata has to activate early in the turn and use it, because it ends at the end of the turn, so you can never guarantee that you'll always be protecting your crew unless you can guarantee that you'll be getting initiative. Debilitating Poison gives enemies who suffer poison damage Distracted 1 within 4 inches. Since Harata activates early in the turn to use Haka, it'll be a full turn until the enemies he poisons get distracted, so I'm not sure about this one getting use in EVS. Distraction, not to be confused with Distracted, is a phenomenal ability, but Harata doesn't benefit from it himself. It gives Harata some consideration out of keyword, but in EVS specifically it only applies to Maxine's melee attack and impromptu invention. Echoes in the Ocean gives Harata a free ski marker drop, but can only be used once per turn when another ski marker is being removed within 4 inches, making it pretty restricted. It could help when both players take a scheme like Leave Your Mark and drop markers in similar areas. His melee attack is great at min damage 3 with a 2-inch range. Infect is just okay, but Sweeping Strike is an especially good trigger if you have a high tome, as always. Crash Against the Waves is an easy to cast shockwave attack for spreading Distracted, but it can also spread poison, push, or remove a ski marker using the triggers. Most models will require an 8 to pass the duel, which is good, and the small shockwave 1 is kind of a benefit since your EVS models will be near melee anyway. Harata's biggest issue is frailty. Defense 6 is nice, but average willpower and none of the common defensive abilities is playing with fire on such an expensive model. Harata's defensive strategy is to combine Concealment or Distracted with his Nieri Haka, which is excellent at range, but prevents him from using the other Haka, still leaves him vulnerable before he activates, and Distracted can't be stacked high enough to consistently protect Haka and melee from multiple attacks. As always though, never forget about Intrepid Emissary, who makes Harata impossible to take down as long as you have a hand. Final verdict, in keyword, 4 stars. Harata is going to be invaluable in some matchups where the opponent's crew generates tons of positive flips or has lots of ranged attacks, and lackluster in matchups where he struggles to contribute or is assassinated too easily. Out of keyword, 2 stars. Harata has a lot of potential synergies with other Explorers crews like Poison, Distracted, negative willpower duels, dropping ski markers, and using weak crows. But due to how frail he can be and the competition from other choices, it's often hard to justify the 10 cost price tag. Tidecaller, 8 cost Enforcer. Tidecaller is a supportive tosser who seconds as a fighter disruptor type model. Toss with size 4 is the primary reason the main EVS strategy works, since in one activation with no target numbers, he can toss 3 models 10 inches up the field either into the opponent's face or onto objectives. This is important for aggression, but also for moving multiple models a far distance within a single activation, especially important if keeping several auras in range of each other. Tidecaller, Orville, Harata is the key combo here. Tide pushes Maxine, Harata, and Orville 10 inches forward on turn 1, making them unhittable by anything that doesn't ignore concealment. Just note that he can't toss Calypso, since Calypso is size 4. Heavy Torrent grants Tide his bonus action toss with a 10-inch range. It can't be used when engaged due to the gun icon, it does suffer from concealment, and it reduces push distance by the distance between Tide and the target, but it doesn't suffer friendly fire or cover, and against nearby models it's almost identical to a normal toss as a bonus action. Practically speaking, it can never push an enemy further than 10 inches away from Tide, and on average, it's a 5-inch range action which can't fail on friendlies and pushes 5 inches in any direction, which is just solid. Offensively, stat 4 against size is a very good hit chance too. Toss can be used for pushing enemies off corrupted leylines markers from 19.9 inches away with a Walk Torrent for general crowd control, or as an attack by pushing one enemy into others. Stat-wise, 5/5 defenses with armor 1 and 8 health isn't invulnerable, but it's a solid bulk. Immunity to Hazardous can be good in some matchups, and 5 move with immunity to severe terrain is just fine. Just be aware that the more he tosses, the more he's going to lag behind. Reconfigure on masks is great since it doesn't compete with crows or tomes. Weighted Anchor is a good attack with great triggers. The downside is how focus hungry he is, like Kiya before him. That 246 damage track really wants a straight flip. Masks are a 15 duel total, so against defense 5 it's a straight flip roughly 30% of the time without enemy cheating. The Spread It Around trigger is a better sweeping strike which can practically remove an enemy from the game if followed up with a 10-inch toss. Like with Kiya's grenade, all the little push effects in EVS make getting good blasts a real possibility too. Whirlpool matches the Reconfigure mask and can do several things. It can get Tidecaller out of combat to use Torrent, it can pull an enemy behind Tide around 6 inches from its current position, or it can abuse nearby terrain by throwing enemies behind it. The attack can even target friendly models, and this trigger still places enemies within 1 inch of them with no chance to resist. Final verdict, in keyword, 5 stars. Put simply, Tidecaller is the best reconfigure mask model and is essential to several EVS strategies. Out of keyword, 3 stars. Tidecaller can be used to increase your crew's mobility, disrupt enemies, and set up a scary alpha strike against a crew which is vulnerable early. He also gives a great use for any lower masks in the hand. At 9 cost he competes with many other options, but he enables some unique and unexpected strategies. Just imagine if your opponent is playing Yan Lo and has the entire machine set up where he sacrifices Toshiro and tries to summon 2 Ashigaru. Now imagine suddenly he has 3 beater models in his face top of first turn. Yan Lo isn't set up yet so he can't help, and suddenly it's very dangerous to start sacrificing your own models and hoping that the Gokuro survives. Dr. Beebe, 6 cost Enforcer, and Calypso Mark II, 6 cost Enforcer. Beebe and Calypso might look like 2 6-cost models, but they're effectively one 10-cost Enforcer with 2 activations 90% of the time. Calypso costs 2 less when Beebe is in the same crew, and those two complement each other so well that Beebe should almost always be piloting Calypso, unless you're specifically protecting another model from damage. Calypso by himself is a weird cheap tank who's immune to the staggered condition, immune to severe and hazardous terrain, can move through models, is normally sluggish but nimble on an unreliable 8, has an average attack, and can destroy some destructible terrain. However, his main mechanic is burying a friendly model to make him a pilot, which lets that model spend AP to make Calypso take actions. Dr. Beebe by himself draws 2 weeks when he activates, but is a flimsy, sluggish healer who can give enemies injured in a 4-inch pulse on an unreliable 10 and has no bonus action. But when piloting, Beebe is buried away from danger, grants himself and Calypso +1 to all duels when taking actions, and passes his reconfigured tomes to Calypso, making consistent the best things that they both do. When combined, they become one of the strongest beater disruptor models in the game potentially. Firstly, defenses. Calypso has defense 6 with armor 2 and 6 health, which takes 3 damage 4 attacks to kill and reduces the common min damage 3 to just 1. He also is immune to hazardous, which comes in handy against enemies like Yan Lo who can decimate an armor 2 model. Willpower 5 from Beebe is good enough. When Calypso dies, he blows up for 2 damage, which Beebe is immune to. With Calypso's 50mm base and the 2-inch range, Beebe can easily be placed out of melee range if the active model charged, and if Calypso died to a ranged attack, Beebe can sometimes place out of line of sight. As long as Beebe doesn't take 6 damage, he can then activate and use his bonus action to resummon Calypso with at least 2 health. He needs a scrap marker for the summon, which Calypso doesn't drop on death, but while piloting, Beebe can spend an action to treat a tome and drop one within 4 inches to use later. All this together makes it extremely hard to remove Calypso permanently. Calypso needs to be killed with enough AP left to reach and kill Beebe in a single activation, since as long as he's in danger, Beebe will be holding his activation until as late as possible. Alternatively, if Calypso is ever left at low health, Beebe can just activate and heal him 2 or 4 using both of his AP, which is extremely effective due to the armor 2. Mobility-wise, Calypso is only walk 4, but immune to severe terrain and the staggered condition. Onward as a bonus action on a 7 fixes the situation, giving him up to 12 inches of movement in a single activation. And remember, they technically get 2 activations. He also ignores vertical distance when moving, which is a little awkward, but basically it means he can walk or charge right through the common boxes and barrels that litter Malifaux boards. If you put all this together, Calypso can move 24 inches in a single turn, which is absurdly fast moving, especially for something this big and tanky. Calypso's attack with Beebe piloting can be used up to 4 times during the turn, and for most intents and purposes becomes a TN15 defense simple duel for the opponent, especially for Beebe since he can draw 2 weak tomes to immediately use when he activates. The attack ignores resistance triggers and deals effectively 3 minimum damage since the trigger damages all enemies within a pulse 3 by 1 and pushes them 2 inches in any direction. For the most part, Calypso just wants them all crowded around him for when he explodes. It can also make enemies trigger hazardous terrain to be effectively minimum 4, it can help exit engagement, or it can bunch enemies up to blast on. Just remember the push is not voluntary, so it will damage friendly models if they're not touching something which can prevent the push. To add a little bit of utility, Calypso can destroy all destructible terrain within 3 inches on a 6, which helps against the tactic of blocking key areas with ice pillars, pit traps, and other terrain markers. This action can be used anywhere, and it shares the melee attack trigger, so it can deal damage to nearby models and push them with no opposed duel. And finally, Calypso is extremely strong in some strategies and schemes. 6 cost only gives up a single bounty token in public enemies, and several schemes like Vendetta, Assassinate, Hidden Martyrs, and Take Prisoner can be scored or denied using Beebe or by burying another model with Calypso. Final verdict, in keyword 5 stars. Take Beebe and Calypso in any matchup where the opponent can't attack buried models. They're a steal for 10 stones and the only source of reconfigure tomes anyway. I would go so far as to say, if you know your opponent might bring something that can attack buried models, just don't declare EVS at all. Beebe and Calypso and their reconfigure tomes is that important. Out of keyword, 3 stars. Beebe and Calypso are 12 cost out of keyword and work exactly the same way, as none of their abilities require being in an EVS crew. There are a lot of synergy opportunities for Calypso's melee push with hazardous terrain especially, and the way they can abuse some strategies and schemes can take an opponent by surprise. Take a look at these two with Syndicate and as a scrap generator in Wastrel. Harpooner, 7 cost minion. The Harpooner is underwhelming. 6 defense doesn't make up for willpower 4 and 7 health with no defensive tech. Predatory Instinct, Deep Discovery, and Reconfigure don't do enough to make up for the stats of 5, average damage, and average utility for 7 cost. EVS have enough short omnidirectional pushes, and Reel In is heavily restricted in the direction it can move. Massive Net and the Compressed Nets trigger is actually good, but this alone doesn't pull the Harpooner up enough, and EVS doesn't have any crazy synergies with Staggered. Most of all though, EVS is designed best for a fast, combat-heavy playstyle, which has little use for a fragile gunner with some awkward utility when Tidecaller already handles the mask reconfigure. However, as a replacement for a hopeful prospect, this choice isn't awful. If the prospect lands a long-range kill, the Harpooner still has long-range actions and isn't stuck as an isolated melee minion. Also, the small push and staggered utility is at its strongest towards the end of the game when last-minute scheming occurs. Unfortunately, hopeful prospects don't synergize well with EVS either, and final verdicts are based on hiring prospects. So, final verdict, in keyword 1 star, out of keyword 1 star. Machinist, 5 cost minion. The Machinist doesn't do nearly enough to take. She's like the Harpooner in that she doesn't really work well with the crew's primary playstyle. Average stats with 5 health and no movement help makes her sluggish and fragile, and the range on her relevant features put her in danger once melee combat starts. Eye of the Hurricane is way too niche and easily removed by killing the Machinist. Reconfigure Crows is already covered with Kiya or Harata, both of her attacks are awful, and Beebe already has the same healing ability while staying safe inside Calypso. Quartermaster would be nice if it didn't require discarding a card, but as it is, it only gives shielded +1 for a full AP and cycles a card in a crew which already cycles like crazy. It can sometimes get you out of clogging the engine, but the crew already has several options for drawing cards, so it doesn't help enough. Navigation charts is interesting, but ultimately reshuffling 2 Severes and giving out 1 focused per turn is not impactful enough to justify taking the Machinist, even in such a focus-hungry crew. The final verdict is in keyword 1 star, and out of keyword 1 star. Out of keyword choices. The issue with out-of-keyword choices in EVS is that Maxine's card cycling requires many reconfigures, and is therefore restricted to EVS models. But on the other hand, Maxine's core crew isn't as good at completing schemy skirmish-type objectives as they are at combat-focused ones, so they definitely benefit from out-of-keyword models. The most important one to mention is Intrepid Emissary, because it can protect Maxine or another model when they're all being tossed up early in the game. Some versatile models that don't work out very well with EVS are Mr. Natado, because the most important models in the crew are too expensive to bully, Botanists, because the EVS crew doesn't make any terrain markers, and Hopeful Prospects, because the crew already cycles cards like crazy and he's too small to be worth tossing up. Some unique possibilities for the EVS crew are Mikhail the 16th as a replacement for Intrepid Emissary against Hard to Wound, as he's extremely powerful if given fast, and can be tossed up to make up for his low move value. The Brock Inspector from the Umbra crew can be used as a replacement for Orville to make for a more consistent concealment bubble, but he can't benefit from Harata's Haka, so maybe that doesn't work out as well as it does in my head. Instead of that, maybe it could work out to take a Lamplighter and place the lamp markers such that when you toss up Harata and the other models, they'll benefit from the concealed. And finally, Austera and Twitch can help you preemptively know where your opponent is going to deploy and give you some emergency card cycling, as well as some scheming potential from far away. As a quick note, Chronicle Effects and Explorers crews can often be very valuable out of Keyword because we have access to a lot of healing effects, but unfortunately EVS doesn't have enough to really make it worthwhile. Core Crew. In my opinion, the core crew for EVS looks like this: Maxine, Orville, Beebe and Calypso, Tidecaller, Intrepid Emissary, and then depending on whether you're expecting a melee force or a ranged force, either Kiya or Harata. This gives you 12 to 13 stones left, which is enough for either an expensive model or for like a mid-rangey model and one upgrade. Counterplay. When going against EVS, be careful about taking investment options like Effigy Fate upgrades or complex turn 1 summoning engines. EVS can hit you early and hard, so you'll need all the power you can get immediately. Hard to wound, hard to wound, hard to wound. EVS has many steep damage tracks and relies on focused or manipulating differences in dual totals for straight damage flips. Hard to wound makes some of their core models hit weak for 2 damage and shuts this tactic down almost completely. When playing against EVS, be smart to minimize Deep Discovery, Reconfigure, and Maxine's card draw engine. Killing Maxine is your best bet if you can manage it, but anything that makes it less likely that EVS will have the right suit at the right time can help. Forcing discards, targeting non-EVS models, repeatedly targeting models with the same Reconfigure suit, or killing all the models of a single Reconfigure suit are all strategies that make it more likely to clog the cycling engine with bad suits. Take quick moving melee assassins, models which ignore concealment, bonuses to initiative, and willpower targeting movement effects to isolate and kill Orville or Harata if you're afraid of them hiding in the Harata concealment bubble. Have a plan for handling Calypso's armor too and kill Beebe, otherwise you'll get nowhere and waste too many resources pumping attacks into Calypso. Remember you can block line of sight by standing on a scrap marker. If you have access to a model that can attack buried models, it's almost impossible for Beebe to live long. And finally, if you can't win the melee, take models who can exit engagement and focus on scoring schemes to win on victory points. EVS can't consistently keep up with fast, spread out crews, especially not while maintaining their Maxine bubble. And with that, the EVS review is finally done. Thank you so much for watching the whole thing if you did. Here's a summary of the ratings. Take a guess at which keyword you think I'll be reviewing next in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you next time.